Cocoa is mostly grown in West Africa by smallholders on family farms. They sell their cocoa down the supply chain, where it goes through several steps and changes before it becomes the chocolate that you enjoy. Children often help out on these small farms alongside their families. Not all work done by children is harmful, but sometimes the tasks they do are hazardous, and the work can get in the way of their schooling. This is classed as child labor and is not allowed. About 1.6 million children engage in child labor on cocoa farms in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. The most common hazardous tasks include carrying heavy loads, using sharp tools and pesticides, as well as land clearing. This is unfortunately part of a bigger problem of child labor around the world. Current estimates suggest 152 million children are in child labor, 70% of them working in agriculture. In cocoa, there are many reasons for this concerning situation. Often, farming families are too poor to hire workers to help. Sometimes, farmers don't have access to good schools for their children, and sometimes they don't know that child labor is harmful. Many people confuse child labor with forced labor, but they are not the same. Forced labor means working against one's will and under threat. This is very serious, but exists at a much smaller scale. In Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire's cocoa sector, less than 1% of children in child labor are in forced labor. So, what are we doing to help? Governments, cocoa and chocolate companies, civil society organizations, and farming communities are all working to tackle this problem. Together, we are scaling up systems to protect children. We are improving access to quality education. We are helping families develop other skills to earn money, and we are increasing awareness of the dangers of child labor. And we have seen good progress, with a 30% decline of child labor in communities that have been supported. Children's education is also advancing, with almost all children attending primary school in Ghana and 4 out of 5 in Côte d'Ivoire. But more needs to be done for children in cocoa. Building on successes and lessons learned, programs are being expanded to reach even more children, and efforts are being redoubled to protect them from child labor and tackle root causes. We want to ensure that today's generation of children reach their full potential and have a chance at the bright future they deserve.
So, I believe I'm coming through. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. I just need to share my screen. Let's see if this works. And I'm assuming that that is now coming through. So, good morning. If it's morning for you, good afternoon if it's afternoon. I'm Nick Weatherall from the International Cocoa Initiative. I'm joined today by a very close group of friends, actually, from the chocolate industry, from international organizations, and from farming cooperative, cocoa farming cooperative in Abanguru, Côte d'Ivoire. All of these friends of mine also sit in some capacity on the very diverse ICI board, and I'm thrilled to have them with me today as we explore the challenge of scaling effective action against child labor in the cocoa sector. Yes, sorry, I'm just trying to make this work. Excuse me. Okay. So perhaps just to recap, you've already seen in that video there, I think, some some examples and some really important data to put this situation into context. There are a very large number of children who are undertaking child labor in the cocoa sectors of Ivory Coast and Ghana. The vast majority of them on the family farm. But it's true to say that the phenomenon probably affects almost every cocoa growing household to some extent. Having said that, latest research shows a few things that are encouraging in spite of these daunting numbers. Between 88 and 96% of child laborers are actually now attending school. And 94% of child laborers, just for context, live with their parents or with relatives, and researchers inform us that the remainder, the other 6%, are more often than not children who are outside of their communities attending secondary school, where their communities don't have schools, or actually older children who have already established a household and a farm of their own. The conditions, working conditions for children undertaking child labor, in terms of hours, the average hours worked per child per week in these conditions of child labor is about just over 8 hours per week. So you can see how that is not incompatible with the school attendance that we saw on the previous slide. These are hours that can be done outside of school hours or at weekend. And for most age groups, at least for all kids, children over the age of 12, those are within permissible limits in terms of the numbers of hours worked. But the big problem with child labor in cocoa is the prevalence of hazardous work. Again, 95% of all child laborers are categorized as being in hazardous child labor. And here you can see an idea of just some of the more prevalent hazardous tasks that children are undertaking. And this is the problem. These are all tasks that are defined both within the national frameworks in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, but also under the international conventions as tasks that are harmful either in the immediate term or in the longer term for children. In spite of the daunting numbers, there are some bright spots, and I think as we look ahead and consider the task of where we need to get to in the next 5 years, if SDG 8.7 is to be met, we have to focus on these bright spots where we've seen impact. So just focusing on this first one, this was a recent piece of research that was done, which showed that in communities where a mix of interventions, a blend of interventions, whether that's child labor monitoring systems and remediation systems or preventive efforts through community development, that in communities that have had those interventions in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana in place for 3 years, there has been a reduction in child labor by 33%. So that's significant. To put that into broader context, if you look at the global numbers on child labor in agriculture, in the 8 years between 2008 and 2016, there has been a 16% reduction in agricultural child labor. So actually what we're seeing here is that the results and the impacts of our efforts are accelerating that average rate of progress almost 5 times faster. And this is certainly something to take heart from. But if that's the case, then what's the problem? You know, why is this still an issue? Why is this still a very taxing problem for the sector and its sustainability ambitions? And frankly, it's pretty simple. These efforts that we've seen that have impact are still not being implemented at anything like the scale that we need. We estimate that child labour monitoring and remediation systems, which you'll see also from the middle graphic here, also have a proven impact, are currently reaching about 20% of cocoa farmers. So good impact, but not enough scale. And I think that's really the challenge that we now have in front of us all as a sector in West Africa. So what can we do about that? At ICI, we've recently adopted a new strategy to see us through until 2026, which we really have focused on trying to analyze what's blocking the scaling journey, what are the barriers to scale, and what conversely are the drivers of scale that will really help us reach a far greater number of children at risk. Well, first, we have to expand knowledge. So we need more research into what works, we need more innovation, and we need that to be marshaled through a collective learning process so that we have consensus from all parties on these theories of good practice. We've got to continue sharpening our cost effectiveness. The models we've seen progress with so far are they cost, they carry, you know, they are quite complicated to implement in some cases, and so we've got to continue to innovate to try and make them more scalable. More cost effective as well. And there's really exciting work underway in the sector looking at risk-based modeling, for instance, as a way of lightening the burden. We have to strengthen alignment. This is a collective effort. We know it's all about shared responsibility. And ultimately, though, we need all actors moving in the same direction on this. So we've got to work from a script of core definitions and commonly defined priorities. We've got to define respective roles and responsibilities between the different actors. We've got to align ourselves on what we're committing to, finding our focus and really prioritizing. And we've got to move forward on what absolutely has to be a level playing field if it's going to work, and we're going to pull the sector with us. And ultimately, that's going to require a lot more coordination and a much more sophisticated approach to coordinating the ever-growing number of actors that we need involved. We need greater motivation in the sector. We think this can come obviously in the form of compulsion from the regulatory developments that are now underway, particularly focused on mandatory human rights due diligence, which we believe can be a strong vehicle for driving the scale up of good practices. But we also need people to be motivated for the positive as well, and the fact that there's a reputational dividend to be had from doing the right thing. We need greater accountability for sure in the sector, built on transparency. So we at ICI and everyone in the sector, I think, working on this issue wants to see a common sector results framework that can tie us into a more transparent journey where we are also showing progress against commonly defined metrics and also benchmarks and standards to ensure that what we do is impactful and of high quality. Of course, resourcing, if we need to move from 20% to 100%, it's going to take more resources. So on one side, we can be more cost effective and better coordinated and more efficient about what we do, but we are also going to need to bring new partners and really crowd other actors into this collective journey. And we've probably got to start, therefore, thinking also beyond cocoa, recognizing that these are challenges that affect agricultural sectors uniformly. And we will have to mobilize new donors to get involved, because right now there is a lot of donor funding available, but how much of it is really sort of channeled and funneled towards the right sort of things that drive impact on child labor, we think that there's a lot of room for improvement there. And finally, we're going to need more capacity. you know, it's all good having knowledge, it's good having resources, but we have to have the capacity to put things into place on the ground. And we've got to move, therefore, from an orientation that focuses on implementing projects to actually having sustainable systems that work together to move things to scale. And we see a really powerful nexus between national systems, community systems, and supply chain systems as one way forward on that. So the other thing is that none of these drivers of scale are sort of standalone. They all are highly mutually reinforcing. So let's take the example of transparency. Well, it's only with transparency that we will get the reputational dividend that we believe can motivate the sector to do more and do better. It's only with transparency that we will have the confidence of donors to expand their support into the work that needs to be done. It's only with transparency that we'll be able to feed data on results into a data-driven learning process, which is so key to innovating in the sector. And it's only with transparency that we'll properly be able to understand who's doing what and where and how to better coordinate ourselves. When it comes to specific aligned commitments, there is good progress, and we start to see now commitments coming, for instance, from the industry, which are, I would say, increasingly aligned across the companies. So there is this set of core commitments which have now been endorsed by the WCF board, as Rick has informed me. And these commitments are now being integrated into, increasingly integrated into companies' sustainability work on the ground. And key amongst them is a commitment to scale up the coverage of child protection systems that prevent and remediate child labor to 100% by 2025 in those companies' supply chains. There's also growing emphasis now on tackling root causes. So there is an aligned commitment from companies in Côte d'Ivoire, from leading companies to support the Jacobs Foundation's CLEF facility to improve access to quality education for 5 million children. And we obviously hope that a similar commitment can be made in Ghana to also improve, strengthen access, particularly to secondary education, which is so key for the youth, working youth. And there, as we know, are strong and aligned commitments now to paying a living income differential, and also to scaling up farmer training to go some way to improving farmer incomes, which, as we know, is a key poverty driver of child labor. But is all of this going to be enough? Well, no, it's not. Even if we take the idea of scaling those child protection systems that are effective to 100%, that is only going to drive the 30% reduction in child labor across the board. So that still leaves a lot of child labor. So even to do this, we're going to need more than just industry commitments. But to do more, we absolutely are. And so just to conclude, we have a process underway, a number of different actors, but really a process that's led by the governments of Ivory Coast and Ghana at the moment to build a new public-private partnership to really accelerate progress on a multi-stakeholder basis. We have been in this process now for 18 months, a painstaking process, but that's what it takes to build consensus among different groups. And through that process, I think we are emerging now with not only a sense of priorities and a clear sense of comprehensive needs that need to be addressed, but also a structure that we can start working with. And so the hope, certainly our hope, is that 2021, which is the year, the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour, will be the year in which we'll have a new partnership in place. we've still got some steps to go in that, not only in terms of defining the frameworks for action, but also crucially building the accountability framework into that and the governance structure. But if we do, and if we succeed in this, then the hope is that we will absolutely start to have the greater alignment that we need, the greater motivation that we need, the higher level of resourcing that we need, the stronger capacities that we need, and ultimately a much more accountable approach to tackling this problem. And with that, it's certainly my hope and my belief that we will be able to make that push for scale, a push for scale that is absolutely necessary, but really importantly also one that we believe is absolutely possible. Thank you. So now I'm going to change hats from presenter to a moderator of my panel, and I'm going to invite my fellow panelists to reveal themselves. Let's see how that works. Thank you very much. Jeff from Hershey's, Kate from Cargill, Francesco from ILO, and Camille from Kamai Cooperative. Welcome. I'm going to start by just asking you, and please be blunt. It's weird to present something and then ask for your reactions, but in terms of what I've just presented to you, I'm going to ask each of you, is there something particularly that resonates or resonated for you? And conversely, is there something in there that worries you or raises doubts? Maybe I will start. Jeff, do you want to kick us off on that, please?
Absolutely, and thank you for having us here today. One thing that resonated from my perspective would be the level of conversation and particularly the transparency that we're now having. You know, to be transparent and honest, this has been a journey for Hershey.
Jeff, you appear to have. Okay, Jeff, you've frozen, unfortunately. So I'm gonna pass to Francesco now. Francesco, from your perspective, ILO's perspective, anything that resonated in there? Anything that concerns you?
Thanks, Nick, and also let me use this opportunity to thank you and the WCF for inviting the ILO. What strongly resonates with me is the fact that the ILO really welcomes this increased commitment from the industry on to fight against child labor and cocoa, and the ILO would also remind the industry by the same occasion that child labor is not only a child protection matter, but is primarily a labor matter. And as such, unless we are all in a position to guarantee decent work condition for adults and for the farmers, we will not get rid of this issue of child labor anytime soon. And something that worries me, as you asked, is you said yourself, you were talking about alignment, and alignment is key of all the partners involved. And I think the worst enemy of alignment is the lack of coordination. And what the worst thing that we can do is to propose parallel system to the government, which has to take the lead in driving this fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. So maybe we'll have a chance to come back to that later, but I'd just like to hear also from other panelists. Kate, from your perspective, please.
What resonated, Nick?
Yeah.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. For me, I think actually we need to recognize the bright spots. There has been a lot of work and we have been successful in building capacity and capabilities. And certainly there's more that we can do, but I think the companies have done this in a number of different ways. I mean, Cargill, we, for instance, have spent a lot of time and significant efforts on looking at how we can work with different actors in our supply chain. We've spent time strengthening farmer organizations and looking at how we can professionalize them, but not only professionalize, but also through programs such as the Cargill Co-op Academy, we've actually looked at how they can be actors for social change within their communities. That is important. Equally important is through the CLMRS systems and models that we're running across a number of different geographies, different models that involve different members of the community, whether it's a farmer coach, whether it's a woman in a cocoa growing household, or others to actually raise awareness themselves with households on what is hazardous child labor and help us in monitoring and observing what could be some of the risk factors or if it is actually happening. But we don't only do the monitoring, we've also taken a holistic approach, and we're looking at actually addressing some of those root causes. So when we work with women through the delivery models that we have and through partners like CARE and Empower Her, we actually try and pass on entrepreneurship skills and capacity building so that they can generate incomes and reduce the underlying risks of child labor. So as a company, finally, we also work with you, ICI. You've been critical in helping build our own knowledge in-house and helping us understand how we can integrate these systems into our supply chain. So we're really encouraged by the idea of the capacity that we have built, but we also recognize that we need to advocate for more capacity. We need to advocate to consuming country governments. We need to be at the table with producing country governments also to continue to explain what kind of capabilities are needed for the different actors in the supply chain. And for me, we need to acknowledge the progress that has been made and indeed recognize that that capacity needs to continue to build if we want to achieve that scale.
Excellent. Well, that's a great segue maybe to ask Camille to come in. Camille, I don't know if you can put yourself on video and unmute yourself. But yes, in French if you like, but something from you, you know, as someone who manages a cooperative.
Moi, c'est Camille de la coopérative Camaillé. Et effectivement, je suis responsable de coopérative. En tant que producteur, nous sommes au centre même du travail des enfants. Nous sommes les plus concernés directement par ce phénomène. Et donc, il y a des éléments quand même qui nous sautent à l'œil, qui sont vraiment pour nous tellement importants. C'est vrai que les éléments d'heures de travail, du nombre d'enfants qui travaillent, les statistiques et autres, c'est vrai, c'est important. Mais pour nous, ce qui est plus frappant, c'est les tâches que les enfants font dans les plantations. Et donc, si les enfants font des tâches les plus dangereuses, et c'est ça que je pense qu'à notre niveau, c'est un élément très important que nous regardons, qui nous intéresse par rapport à tout ce qu'il faut mettre en place pour lutter contre le travail des enfants. Donc, la dangerosité des tâches que les enfants font dans les plantations. Ce qui encore, au niveau des engagements des compagnies, des industriels, c'est vrai qu'il y a beaucoup de choses que les compagnies industrielles ont pris en compte, mais pour moi, il y a un élément qui est aussi très important qui n'a pas été pris en compte, pour moi, qui est aussi très important, c'est le travail des femmes, l'autonomisation des femmes dans la cacaoculture, dans le milieu agricole. Il faudrait que ça aussi, ça soit quelque chose qu'on voit ça de près, parce que si les femmes sont en activité, je pense que ça peut aussi aller dans le sens de diminuer, parce que les femmes sont plus proches des enfants. C'est les femmes qui sont dans les foyers qui s'occupent des enfants. Et donc, si les femmes sont autonomes, je pense que ça va permettre aussi d'impacter sur le travail des enfants dans la cacaoculture. Je crois que c'est sur ces deux points-là que je voudrais faire mon intervention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Camilla. I think you raised two very, very important points there. I mean, if we had more time, I would love to go into a discussion on this question of hazardous work and whether or not there are things, you know, it really does seem to be the main problem is the hazardous tasks that are being taken. And so I think we should reflect as we think of the next 5 years about how we can really lean into those specific challenges of the harm and the risks of specific work tasks that are currently undertaken by kids. But I think you also raised this important question of you know, maybe something missing in what I presented was the importance of the empowerment of women in all of this. And I can, you know, I can absolutely acknowledge, and all the research shows that women in various roles, whether that's household roles or management roles in cooperatives, for instance, or in child protection roles, have a much amplified impact on child protection. So we mustn't lose sight of that link. Now, maybe Kate, I could bring you back in therefore, because these emerging industry commitments that I referenced, obviously that's not the sum total, is it? And you also were talking about other things that you're also doing on gender and so forth. So can you just maybe clarify for everyone, you know, where other bits of work that are also relevant to child labor will come in?
To addressing the issue of child labor, absolutely. I mean, this isn't something that can be done exclusively through CLMRS systems. So if we're looking also at a more holistic model, for example, and looking at ensuring that we're also addressing socioeconomic development in communities. And that can be through a number of different interventions, whether it's working with women or young people. But I think what we need to think about most importantly also is, what does the industry need from other actors in order to be able to translate these commitments into more support for children? And I think sector actors really need to reflect on their unique roles, and they need to think about where they can bring that added value. These sort of issues, child protection and labor issues, they're not going to be solved easily. And certainly industry is not going to be able to solve this puzzle in isolation. And so it's incredibly important that we have different actors in the sector at the table, not just industry. We need consuming country governments to come in. We need them to encourage policy that can be operationalized, to sensitize consumers, to help provide technical and financial support also to the consuming countries where many of these challenges lie. And I think multi-stakeholder platforms like the ones we see emerging at an EU level are incredibly important and critical to bringing all of those stakeholders together to do that. But I think we also need to think about what other actors there are. We have producing country governments that want to deliver on their national action plans for social protection. Those are important initiatives, and those need to be supported so they can raise standards of cocoa production. And standards themselves are a very important tool. You know, if they're well defined, if they're complete in their definitions, if they have strong implementation guidelines, they can also raise the bar of what sustainable cocoa is. And I hope that also actors such as civil society and consumers will continue to also lean into this issue, because there is a lot of nuance. And I'm not using that, and I don't think we want to use that as an excuse at all, but it is complex, and it's the reality that we're working on. There's a lot of different supply chain models and types, and it's not something that there is no silver bullet. And then finally, I think I'm glad to see Camille on the call, because we also need the perspectives of cocoa growing families and farm organizations. I mean, ultimately, they're going to tell us, how do we address those hazardous tasks, and how do we really safeguard the well-being of children in the communities where they're living? So for me, accelerating and scaling and translating this into really protected children in the cocoa supply chain is going to be a big team effort where we're all playing different roles.
Absolutely. Francesco, maybe we could come back to you then, because this team effort that Kate describes, you know, as you said, we've been at this for quite a long time. We've probably not excelled necessarily as a sector when it comes to coordination. And what we're saying now is that we need even more actors to get involved. So, you know, any key principles from ILO's perspective, either on you know, coordinating and getting all of these different systems to fit together, or even, you know, the first step of moving us you know, one step beyond this project focus and really getting starting to be part of a system change that reaches all households and all farmers at risk.
Thanks, Nick. It's a very good question, and of course I don't have the silver bullet myself, but I think Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, having lived there and worked there for many years on this issue of child labor, and also, by the way, greetings to all friends in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire that might listen to us today. They made such a tremendous effort in setting up the legal framework and the institutional framework which is adequate to fight against child labor. And I think as partners, all of us, we should simply respect this. That should be our starting point, period. We need to have the countries to implement their national plans. They have these plans. And this, you know, they didn't come overnight. These plans have been done by consulting all the possible partners, the social partners in particular, and others. So I think it's our responsibility to take a step back sometimes and just to think. And yes, we come with fantastic ideas, with resources in different ways, but at the end, we need to strengthen their capacity to play this catalyst role in implementing their plan. As you know, ILO and UNICEF, we have no particular interest in this particular supply chain. And by the way, in any supply chain, we are intervening. But our interest is really to make sure that the international standards are implemented. And we are very tough with the countries when, as you know, when our control mechanism, when the conventions are not implemented and so on. But when we recognize that the national and the institutional legal framework are there, then it's just a matter for all of us to align, as you said before, and to present something that it works for everyone. The worst thing we can do is to come out with parallel system, I think. Then another point which was said before is it's time for this. The government it was said before, the industry cannot solve it all. It's clear, obviously. Nobody asked the industry to solve it all. It's the primary responsibility of the government. They understand this very well, to provide, you know, for education, for health, and also for the other basic services that there's no one else that can replace them there. But our role in supporting them is to make sure that, you know, we fill the gaps and we promote something that makes sense to them and is applicable and scalable, as you say. Something else I would like just very shortly to say, and, you know, maybe it's a broken record for you because I've been saying this many times. Let's not tackle only cocoa when we tackle a geographical area, when you tackle a community, etc. Let's have an integrated area-based approach, tackling all the worst form of child labor in that area. Otherwise, this creates some effect which we have seen in the past and didn't work. And let's focus on prevention. This was said before as well, on the root causes.
Okay.
More ambitiously, last point, maybe we should rethink somehow also on the supply chain itself. It's not for here to solve this, but how we make sure that we create a supply chain where the farmers have better salaries, where they can get organized, where you know, they have contracts that ensure them decent work. These are huge challenges, but we really believe that's the way to go in the long run. And the solution is dialogue.
Thank you, Francesco. So I'm going to just, because I really want to give the last word to Camille. And by the way, apologies everyone, because we lost Jeff. So we don't have a brand's perspective as we wanted to have, and I'm really sorry about that. But just to take the last 2 minutes, Camille, if you are still with us, can you confirm that you're there? Okay, no Camille, but it seems that Jeff is here. But it also seems that we're out of time. Jeff, I'm really sorry. You've obviously just made it back. So I'm actually going to give you the last word because we lost you. And please, whether it's in relation to the discussion that's been had, you may not been able to follow it, or the presentation I gave earlier, just some last thoughts from you before we let people go to the next session.
Apologies for technology in these trying times. You know, this is, as we've talked about, this is important work. We know that we have systems in place that can make a difference. I think, you know, the biggest perspective would be that it's all about scale, and it's all about getting everyone to the table. Instead of just the coalition of the willing that we have today, as you talked about, how do we get to a level playing field so that all companies are moving this forward? Because if one company, regardless of their size, fails in this area, we're all painted with the same brush. So we all stand to lose if we're not all in this together, working in the same direction.
Very good. Okay, thank you for that uplifting but sobering conclusion. Thank you to the panel. I'm really sorry we didn't have 3 times as much time, but we must now let people go to the next session, I believe. So with that, I draw this panel to a close, and thank you all very much.